Welcome back to the broadcast. And as earlier mentioned, the CEO of SAMA, Wendy Gonzalez, is with us this evening. The conversation revolving around the evolution of AI and just how it is looping in the world, that is to enjoy the successes of it. And of course, as we get to these conversations, basically we as well get to understand how she finds her way here. In a bit of making sure that at least you as the girl out there is empowered with her story. Of course, the lines are open for you to interact with us. As always, the hashtag is #HerSay. We'll be looking at some of your comments as we continue with the broadcast. Thank you so much, ma'am, for creating time to be here with us.
Pleasure to be here, Linda.
All right, and we go straight to it. Summer, just what about it before we get deep into the conversation?
Absolutely. SAMA, we are an AI technology company. So we help some of the world's largest companies build their AI models, and we do that right here in Nairobi, Kenya.
And beautiful. Just how is the girl involved in this now that you are the CEO? And how, you've worked with them for quite a long time. I was checking up on your profile.
Yes, I've been with SAMA since, for over 9 years now, since early 2015. So at SAMA, we have a social mission. Our goal is to be able to empower women and youth to join the digital economy. So our goal is to provide digital upskilling and then hire people into entry-level jobs so they can get their first job in technology in the formal economy. We have a focus specifically on hiring women, in fact, because I'm sure as you would probably agree, when women succeed, society succeeds.
Right. They
send their children to school, they get involved in the community. So we have a purposeful hiring model where we hire at least 50% women. So right now in our company, we have 53% women in our company, and that is from our entry level all the way up through our management levels.
Beautiful. So why this kind of bias, in as much as the world is saying that, well, let us proceed to empower the girl child, let us push to ensure that we have a 50-50 representation across. I mean, one would want to argue that it can be quite a difficult thing to achieve, especially understanding that maybe the girl child is not so much so engraved in technology.
Well, that's the beauty of this model. So really from a social mission standpoint, we want to reduce the barriers to employment. So jobs in the digital economy are plentiful, right? There's a lot of demand for entry-level technical skill sets. And so in our hiring model, we do not expect people to have computer science degrees. We actually hire on the basis of impact. So you don't need to have a degree in technology. We provide the digital upskilling, so we train people, and we want to ensure that there's equal footing for both men and women. So hence our focus is that oftentimes women face a lot of barriers to employment, in particular in technology. I've definitely seen it in my career as well.
All right, beautiful. Speaking of your career, a bit of your story and how you find your way here.
Well, I started by going to university, so I feel thankful. My parents, I have 2 older brothers, but they had the same expectation of me. Like, you're going to go to college, and get a job just like everybody else did. And I started my career in accounting and information systems, but I found fairly quickly, I joined Ernst & Young. They're a large global accounting and audit firm, and I found very quickly that I liked technology better, actually. So I transitioned from auditing into the management consulting group, where I started to basically deploy the latest technologies for, Fortune 500 companies across the globe, and that's what really spawned my interest. So from there, I went to 2 public companies to join in IT leadership roles. I loved it so much, I wanted to found my own company. So I founded an Internet of Things startup. And then from there, I joined SAMA, where this idea that we could bring technology to a whole new population, in particular women and youth in underserved communities, was something I felt really passionate about.
All right, and so here we are. You are actually doing it. Let us acknowledge that AI has been in existence for the longest of time. Just that in this time and age is when we get to feel it, firsthand, and we get to enjoy the benefits of it. But therein lies some element of skepticism as to the goodness of it. Sometimes we want to ask ourselves whether it's really the best thing, especially when it comes to education. And our students here, I will tell you, will always so much run into AI and sometimes not put so much of their mind into reading and all that. What would you say and the world needs to do to create a balance such that we get to benefit but equally address the concerns that come along with AI?
Oh, absolutely. That's such a great point. So one of the things that's really critical, you're absolutely right. I mean, AI, artificial intelligence, has actually been around for multiple decades, right? It's basically this process of leveraging data and predicting outcomes and patterns using computers, basically. And the key, now that technology has advanced so quickly, I mean, I think you mentioned this earlier in your introduction, the adoption of the technology is happening at a record pace. We'll talk a little bit about generative AI as well, which is happening so quickly. But the key in building effective AI systems is being able to, number one, make sure they're explainable. To exactly your point, if you don't expose and aren't transparent about what is your AI doing, how did you build it, what kind of data sets did you use to ensure that it's going to be accurate and bias-free, it's very difficult for the public to trust it. So there are best practices in ensuring not only are you defining what you're building in AI, the data sources you're using, and then the other components, which is actually where SAMA comes in, is the human validation. When this machine is predicting an outcome or generating new content, you need humans to help validate that it's actually working as it's expected to.
Is it not going to take the place of the human as time goes by? We are always scared when we're actually thinking that there's going to be some AI, you know, something that has been set up, and of course they're going to take up the places of the human element in terms of, you know, workspaces. You know, you wake up and there's an anchor which is not a human being and all that. So how do we address that fear?
Well, I think it's really important that we think about how AI is developed. So there's some pretty interesting things that are happening. I know there's some AI work, policy work that's happening here in Kenya. You might have seen some of the work happening in Europe and the US as well, which basically says AI needs to be developed for the good of humanity.
Right.
It's not intended to replace humanity, but for the good of humanity. So it means when AI systems are being built, they need to not only keep in mind how do they affect humanity in a positive way, but that they are not creating a huge amount of displacement. It's really about how humans will work with AI, not how humans will get replaced with AI.
Is that what is happening?
Well, I think that there are some things that are being automated. I think it's very fair to say that we won't be doing things manually forever.
Right.
And I'll kind of give you an example of technology. So many years ago, there was a lawsuit from the Porters Union against suitcase manufacturers. So you know why they were suing was because suitcase manufacturers started building roller bags.
Okay.
And so they protested and said, well, who's going to carry the bags now? Now that you have this new technology to roll these bags. And it's like, well, technology is going to shift. It's going to change, right? And so we can embrace what that change is and move along with it and figure out how humans can move up the value chain, do creative work, other things, and how we can drive value out of AI. So I think it's much better for us to look at how do we adopt it in a really fair and ethical way, as opposed to kind of ignoring that it exists. So there are some really good applications, and actually here, for example, in Kenya, one of the largest industries is agriculture, right? So it represents almost 22%, I think, of the GDP and the jobs. Well, imagine, you know, when there is food scarcity and famine, imagine if you can leverage AI technology to help reduce crop disease and increase crop yield. So it's not about replacing what the farmers do, it's about how can we make those farmers more productive. So there are all sorts of ways in which AI can be leveraged for the betterment of humanity, and that's really how responsible AI should be developed.
Beautiful. You speak about adaptation, and I think one then wants to understand some more in relation to just how the rest of the world is adapting to this. I acknowledge the fact that, you know, it could be relative across. How would you rate Africa and Kenya in particular in terms of just adapting to this?
It's a great question. I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and certainly if I had my say, we would be creating so many jobs here in Kenya from the AI industry. So I think there are a couple of key things. One is, how can we build AI here in Kenya that is going to be impactful? So I'll touch again maybe on agriculture a little bit, where you can build AI that is going to specifically benefit Kenya. So at SAMI, we work with some companies, both abroad and here in Kenya, that are building some amazing technologies. So they're leveraging satellites, to evaluate entire fields of crops. And from the satellites, they're using computer vision AI to identify where pests, weeds are. So normally, right, is that people have to deploy pesticides
Yes.
everywhere, right? It's very costly. It's not very good for the environment, right? Because there's a lot of chemicals in them. Well, what if you had a technology that told you exactly where to apply the pesticide? So you can use this aerial footage to identify where the weeds are, and then the farmer can apply pesticides in only that area. And what that does is that increases crop yield, right? Because you're not putting pesticides across everything, you're allowing the healthy plants to grow, and you're reducing the farmer's costs.
Right.
So that's an example of some technology that we're building. Another example is farmers sell their commodities, right, on the market. Well, there are now some great startups in Kenya that are using AI, so you can take your phone, right, take a picture of your crops, identify, okay, this is how much I've yielded. Load that up directly into a commodities market to sell your goods directly. Right? So there are so many ways in which AI can be leveraged to not only actually be built here, but also to benefit the citizens of Kenya as well.
Well, let's talk about e-learning and education and what you make of it. And like I have told you, sometimes our students sit pretty, knowing very well that, you know, there are elements like the ChatGPT where, you know, during the examinations they will go there and somehow they're going to find solutions to, you know, these critical things. And therefore, this sort of like discourages them from focusing much on education and bringing out the best of them. How do we, again, create a balance on this such that they get to benefit of what this AI brings, but at the same time, they indeed benefit in the sense that they get, you know, concrete elements of education?
Yeah, I have kids myself, and that's one of the first things I say is don't go to one of those generated by models to do your homework, things like that. But I think the key for kids are a couple of things. One is this can be a very powerful tool to help make sure to help students become more productive, right? So imagine having an AI that allows you to gather all this information and synthesize this data. It actually can be quite powerful, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to have the context and understanding of what to do with that. So I think the key thing for education, first of all, is all the core fundamentals of how to do, you know, deductive reasoning, critical thinking, all those things absolutely apply. Whether you have a tool or not, doesn't mean you don't have to have that curiosity and to learn how things are made and built.
Right.
The key will really be about how can you leverage those tools to help make you, a little bit more efficient, to help drive some of that sort of data and insights. Then the second component is that the key is about being able to build AI here, right here in Kenya. So I'm a huge proponent of STEM education. I think it's incredibly important that we start learning computers, from primary school all the way up through secondary and high school. And one of the things that we're doing most recently is we've developed a partnership with the University of Nairobi to basically drive focus in AI. So actually this week I'll be doing a lecture in conjunction with I think the Vice Chancellor to really share about how AI and real-world applications of AI can be done here in Kenya. So I think it's incredibly important is not only do we learn more in STEM and computer science to actually build the AI here so that Kenyans can not only enjoy the fruits of AI, but actually build it for the Kenyan
audience. And that then tells me that in as much as there's this growth that perhaps would almost appear relative across the global fraternity, there's some essence and importance of making sure that this is local and perhaps identifies to the local elements.
Context is important, right? So a lot of these, you might have heard of general artificial intelligence. These are these large models that can kind of do anything. Like it's now embedded in our search engines and things of that nature, which is great. So you need quite a bit of amount of data and human validation to ensure those models are working correctly. But what if you wanted to build a model in Swahili? What if you wanted to build? I was talking to somebody earlier. The crops of wheat here in Kenya look a little bit different than, say, the ones in Russia, right? So if you're leveraging Russian machinery and it's been built off of a different data set in Russia, well, how's that going to work when it comes here to the crops in Kenya? So there's absolutely, I think, a huge benefit to local data sets, the local context as well.
All right. As you highlight some of the challenges of getting to have this penetrate and in a good way, then one would want to understand, we still have, at least in the country, a concern or questions lingering as to how we can as well manage data infrastructure, because that's a huge concern. What are some of the challenges that you have encountered as SAMA, perhaps in trying to make sure that, well, people embrace this element of digitalization, but at the same time, the difficulties that come along with, the infrastructure deficit?
So I think there are probably 4 key elements towards successful development of AI. So the first one is infrastructure, and I actually think that Kenya and the investments that have been made over time to build a really strong internet access is a huge part of it. So number one, to be able to develop AI and have access to it, you need to have internet access. There's been a great amount of investment in that infrastructure. The second is you need to have cloud computing, of course, which requires the internet access and GPUs and CPUs, right? Basically the computing power. So that is one thing that from a supply chain standpoint, we need to ensure that we have the right computer equipment to effectively develop the AI. Second component, beyond the infrastructure, is really related to skill sets. So to be able to effectively develop AI and the best practices of how you build AI, this is where, I mentioned STEM, education, computer science, really building the education to support the development of AI becomes really important. So skills are critical, and then certainly it's really having a very clear understanding of where you want to deploy it. So our discussion earlier, which is how can you leverage AI in a positive way to benefit humanity? So AI for good, such as agriculture, medicine. If I can just digress there for a second on another great application. So there are some amazing companies out there now that are building medical technology that allows life-saving distribution of blood, drugs, and medicine to communities in rural areas. So in Rwanda, as an example, there is a company that actually has drones.
Drones, yes.
So those drones, right, they are unmanned, okay, and they have approved flight paths. And what can happen is that what's difficult in rural communities is you may not have access to all the medicine, all the types of blood, right, because they're small communities. And so there can be a hub in a city where a doctor in a rural community just simply puts a chat in a WhatsApp group and says, we've had an accident or an emergency. I need type O blood. I need, this kind of medicine. That chat goes back to the central headquarters. They put the blood and the medicine in a drone. It flies on that. It's there, in less than an hour, saving somebody's life, right? So it's a great example of how AI technology can be used to help fly that drone to make sure it lands there safely and saves lives.
All right. We have a bit of that in Kenya, and I hope that we can actually leverage on the same to have it cut across. Kisumu has somehow tried it, but of course, lots of questions as to whether then it can be implemented fully. But that aside, and you talk about just how we get to use AI. But one thing that is important, and I'm sure somewhere along what it is that we have already said, we have perhaps touched on that, but just how crucial is responsible AI, and what exactly do we mean when we refer to it?
It's a great question. So responsible AI is really a framework in which artificial intelligence, or AI, is developed. So it really is composed of a few different components. One is, have you identified that your data, right? So what you're using to build your AI, you have a clear purpose. It's been documented, so explainable, right? So the public can understand what's happening there. And have you used the correct data sets and accurate data sets so that the AI that you're deploying is bias-free, right? It doesn't discriminate. It has all the data it needs to be able to perform correctly. The second is that it needs a quality management system. So once AI is deployed into production, it's out in the market, well, data changes, right? The world moves, things change, and so you need to have a quality management system that assures that you're constantly evaluating the AI to ensure that it works as expected. The third is human-centric validation. So how do you make sure that what's being deployed, even if, in generative AI, AI models are generating new content. But you have to ensure that content is factually correct, right? Cannot be manipulated, right? Is accurate and has the right sentiment and tone. So you need that human validation as well. And then certainly, last but not least, you have to clearly document the purpose of that AI so that everybody understands what is it being used for. Because AI and generative AI models, even hair dryers have warning labels, right? They say if you plug it in your water, you could be electrified, right? Well, it's the same kind of thing. You don't want AI to be misused for a purpose, right? So understanding how it's been built, what it should be used for, I think is going to be important. And then also really data privacy. So a lot of times I think when people are leveraging some of these models, they, you say, yep, I accept and agree, agree with all that. But what can be, if you don't read that carefully, is that your data that you're entering could be used to build the AI model. So I think it's going to be very important from an educational standpoint that people understand, hey, if you're using this model, will they be able to use my data? Am I comfortable with that? So privacy and kind of KYC, those kinds of policies are going to need to apply.
I'm sure you've gone in depth to just understand the Data Regulation Act right here in the country and all that. Do you suppose that we have sufficient laws, perhaps, to address concerns that would arise, in relation to, data flouting processes that would happen? Because then we're also talking about ethical AI. So when we're talking about ethical AI, just do we have, tools that are good enough to ensure that even as we use AI, then of course we are guided by certain laws or we are guided by certain rules?
Absolutely. So, I mean, as far as data protection goes, Kenya's pretty strong. There's a very, a good amount of legislation out there to protect individuals' data privacy. Now, that doesn't mean as a user we shouldn't continue the education, right? Because you might sign up and willingly give your, give your information over. So I think from that standpoint, the policies are pretty strong. But there does need to be a national AI policy that is developed for exactly what you just shared, which is ensuring that AI that's developed is responsible. So by responsible, it means what those different elements of, data governance, quality management, et cetera. Well, the need for those become more important when you're talking about higher risk applications. So by high risk applications, let's talk about something like policing or say financial lending. Imagine if you're in a situation, and you might have heard of this inference bias, but if you're doing a lending application, and if the model is built off of, for example, say existing data, well, what ends up happening if the data set you're pulling from shows that very few women get loans approved? It could infer, right? That women should get it. So this is what I mean by like taking a look and making sure your data sets are proper, you don't have bias, because that would be a terrible situation. Ethical AI really has to do with is your AI potentially biased to be harmful to a certain sector of society, right? Women as an example, so that's one of the components. But the other is, how have you built it? Have you built it in an ethical way? So one of the things that is important to us here at SAMA is that we don't leverage the crowd. We have a full-time employment model. So people are paid both base salary, bonus incentives. They have medical, dental, full benefits, and this allows them to focus on quality. I just want to distinguish that a bit from responsible AI. So responsible AI is really the framework in which you develop AI. Ethical AI really has to do with is your AI potentially biased to be harmful to a certain sector of society, right? Women as an example, so that's one of the components. But the other is, how have you built it? Have you built it in an ethical way? So one of the things that is important to us here at SAMA is that we don't leverage the crowd. We have a full-time employment model. So people are paid both base salary, bonus incentives. They have medical, dental, full benefits, and this allows them to focus on quality. So people aren't rushing through trying to just get the right answer because they get paid by the task, but about being able to create quality. And so that's an example as well of ethical AI, is making sure that not only do you have sort of the chain of custody of the data, but that when it's being developed and the people who are developing it are being treated fairly.
All right, beautiful. So the show is biased. I think I said it's biased to women for a moment, and so
I won't complain.
So then, of course, one would want to ask just how friendly is this element of digitization for the girl child. If you're going to look at the country, if we're going to focus much on data, just how much is the girl child, appreciating this? How much is the girl child getting so benefits, that are aligned to the element of technology and digitization?
Yeah, it's I have a daughter as well, and that's one of the things I'm like telling her every day. I'm like, you are really good at math and science, because especially for the girl child, you get to a certain age where it happens where for some reason girls don't think that they're good at technology.
Right.
And the reality is that the percentage of female engineers is much smaller than the number of male engineers. So I think it starts with, first off, the education and really encouraging girls to, that you're good at math, to focus on math and science. But beyond that, specifically at SAMA, one of the things that I was really excited about joining this company is that we're not saying you have to have a PhD in computer science to join. We're here to actually help you develop those skills. So we're really an entry-level technical job where you don't have to have any experience. You can come in, do training, learn how to leverage, computers, using a mouse, a keyboard.
The basics,
The basics, Then understanding, well, what is AI? How is it developed? How can it be used? And our whole goal is to basically provide those digital skill sets so that when somebody comes and joins our entry-level position, they get to know about technology, they learn about data and insights, with the idea being that with the skills that they've built, they can go and continue to get another job in the formal economy, should they choose. So there's no barrier, right? And that's one of the reasons why I was really excited. Well, it is a focus to say, hey, we are going to hire at least 50% women. It's creating that access and opportunity where people who may have never thought about technology are thinking about it. In fact, I met a young woman who joined our company a couple of years ago. She was like, I started working in this, doing entry-level annotation for self-driving cars. She's like, I don't just want to annotate. She's like, I want to build the next self-driving car.
Wow.
So she earned enough money. She went to school to get a degree in data science. She's like, I'm not just going to be a consumer of this. I'm going to build it, right?
Beautiful.
And that's the thing that I absolutely love to see.
Digitization is one element that we can't run away from. But even in the introduction of these in various sectors and areas, there's a bit of resistance. The other day we were talking about just how much AI then is bound to be allowed into the medical sector, like you say, in the country. Something as basic as filling data of say a patient, that data that can be accessed across. I think that is happening very well with education in the country. But we have some element of resistance. What will it take for us to soften the hearts of the people, to get the people to understand the importance of this and understand that this is for their own benefits as opposed to something that comes to take away what it is that they already have?
Yeah, we went through something fairly similar in the U.S. a number of years ago as well, when there was a transition to electronic medical records from paper records. And so all of these different regulations and laws were put in place. HIPAA compliance, if the audience may have heard of that, but it's all these security provisions in place to assure that the information that you provide your doctors and goes to medical, other medical professionals is protected. So I think number one is this data protection. It becomes a very, very important thing. But the other component of it is really education and awareness. So, many years ago, people thought you had to go to a bank, right? You had to go and you had to see the cash. In fact, some people didn't even use banks. Right? Back when my parents were growing up, you would literally stick your cash in your couch, right? And you would leave it at your house. Well, then banking came along and was like, oh, I can earn interest and my money's protected because there's all these federal, these policies in place to ensure that my money is protected. And then comes along M-Pesa. How revolutionary is that technology to now mean that, wow, as an individual, I don't have to go to a bank and have a formal checking account. I can transfer money, and the amount of productivity that has kind of changed. I can't even imagine that anybody now is like, oh, what was life like when you used to have cash and you used to do this? So I think that between the education and the policies, it's going to be one of those things where I think as people really begin to recognize that this could be a huge productivity enhancer, could actually make life easier. That's when we're really going to see adoption. But it also comes with making sure that people understand, is your data being protected, and the appropriate policies in place to do so.
The largest chunk to make sure that this then is adopted in a responsible way in the country lies with the government. And so in executing this mandate, what do you suppose would be necessary for us to accord, or other entities to come into accord to the government so that they can valuably, again, get this to the people?
Yeah, I think it really requires a public-private partnership. So, the government all has their rules, but they're not necessarily, and I say this obviously very respectfully, experts in every area, right? A lot of times where this technology is being deployed is either in research and education or by the companies who are actually building this technology.
Yeah.
And I think what we're finding with AI and generative AI in particular is that where it used to be researchers kind of driving the path forward, now it's companies, right, who are building these models, are really pushing the envelope. So I think a public-private partnership to say, hey, here's how the technology can be deployed, in conjunction with government, who says, hey, how can we establish policies to ensure our citizens are protected and that, AI is for the benefit of humanity. They need to come together so you can get the right experts, and, both in the private sector in conjunction with the government to ensure that there is a healthy balance.
All right, and now that you have highlighted just how different then responsibility would be to ethical AI, then it brings us to another question, the question of regulatory, and I think that's basically what I was asking the other time, the regulatory elements of it. As a country, as Africa, how do we achieve this for the benefit, again, of the people?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, there's no global standard that's happening right now. So each country is really developing their own stance on it. So, the U.S. has a policy, the European Union has a policy, and now regulation. So does Canada. Kenya needs to develop its own AI policy. So I think there's some activity that's happening now with the government to do that. I think they should do that in conjunction with that private-public partnership. But it really needs to center around the kind of the elements we discussed before, which is, and the EU has a pretty promising framework, but is it being developed on assessing the risk of the systems that are being built to ensure there's not harm, right? Having the appropriate structures in place around data governance, privacy, human validation, et cetera. So that does need to be a policy, because otherwise AI will be just developed without that warning label that we were talking about earlier. And so if AIs can be developed and then deployed en masse to the country, then part of citizens, right, feeling comfortable and trusting it is going to be, is it explainable? Do we know how it's being developed? Can we have assurances that it's being deployed correctly?
Beautiful. All right, we have to come to a close. Just that first, the CEO of SAMA, Wendy Gonzalez, thank you so much for speaking to us. What would be your parting shots, even as we close this evening? Anybody
can be an AI. This message is to the audience of girls and women. You have an equal shot at getting in there. Highly encourage it. There are going to be more jobs created here in this sector. So please, stoke your passion, be curious, and anybody can do it. No barriers.
Yes, you have got to be curious. You have got to come out of that element of fear. You have got to, shed off this mentality that AI technology is for the men. In fact, for the longest of time, we've lived in those shadows of, anything technical in the house is going to be fixed by the men. I think we're running away from that. And of course, like they say, the space is open. So why don't you challenge yourself this evening? My name is Linda Lela. It was great having you. I'm looking forward to have another conversation on HASI sometime next Saturday. Do have yourself a lovely evening. Once again, Madam CEO, thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda.
All right.